Hi, good morning, and welcome to another episode of Prepared for the 2024 hurricane season. This morning, I would like to welcome you all, rather this afternoon here in Georgetown. This morning, we have some words from FAO we'd like to hear from from Arand Extraver. Time is yours.
Hi, good morning, Ms. Murillo, and thank you, CARICOM Secretariat, colleagues, beneficiaries, stakeholders, farmers, fishers, members of the agricultural sector. It's with great pleasure that FAO is in collaboration with the CARICOM Secretariat to host this webinar series. We are one of your lead implementing partners on the Regional Climatic Group for Natural Resource Management, Climate Change, and Disaster Risk Management, and in collaboration with CARICOM Secretariat and our development partners, CARDI, ECA, CAPSA, and others, and CRFM, have been working towards improving our delivery of communication and information to all stakeholders within the sector. So this is the beginning, it's the third session, in our series, our webinar series in helping you to get prepared for the upcoming hurricane season. It's right at our doors, and we felt it necessary to provide with you some practical tips and tools of what can be done in your countries to better prepare for the season, and also what we can we look forward to in the post-hurricane should a disaster unfortunately come on our shores. And we live in this area where it occurs and it's occurring more frequently. And therefore, we are here to work with you, help you, and improve our ability to respond and recover after a natural disaster such as a hurricane. It is my pleasure to be here with you and to join the Secretariat in this session. FAO extends greetings and best wishes to each and every one of you and your families in this space. And that is it from our desk. We're here to listen, learn, and share our knowledge with you as part of this session today, where we are going to be talking about preparedness for the livestock sector. Um, Denise, back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Moran. This afternoon, we have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker, Ms. Maxine Brown. She's the livestock specialist at the Rural Agricultural Development Authority in Jamaica. The time is yours. We before we go into our first speaker, let us just do a few housekeeping. I'd like to ask all participants online to please keep your mic muted. There will be a question and answer segment where we would ask that anyone with questions, if we have time to take, to raise your hands with using the feature in Zoom, and we will acknowledge you, and you will be able to then open your mic. But for now, we ask that all remain muted, and I now would remind all panelists, all speakers, to note that the time frame, we like to ask everyone to keep their presentation within 5 to 7 minutes so that we can accommodate those questions. And we look forward to a good session. So, Miss Brown, the time is yours.
Okay, good morning, everyone online, farmers, FAO representatives, CARICOM representatives. My name is Maxine Brown, Livestock Specialist at RADA, and it's really a pleasure for me to be here to share with you some of the tips that we have used also for ourselves in being able to prepare for the hurricane, to be able to recover swiftly from the hurricane, and to restore livelihoods as soon as possible. So some of the things that we do before a hurricane session, oh, sorry, before the hurricane season, is that we also try to look at developing a response plan for farmers. And this is going to be tailored for each farm. Each farmer really have to look at their own situation and decide how it is that when you hear that a hurricane is coming, how are you going to, if you need to evacuate your animals, if you have somewhere else that you can place your animals to chart the direction that you're going to be taking, what venue you're going to be taking. You also want to have information in terms of, contact number for your vets, for your extension officers, etc. Because these are information that you're going to need when you're moving to station in case your animals get sick or you need assistance in terms of probably vehicle assistance to move animals. These are the individuals that will help you to coordinate such an activity. You also want to secure your infrastructure. If it is possible and you can use hurricane straps for your roof, that is something that you would want to do, reinforce, any zinc that you have on the roofing for your houses. I've seen some persons, what they do, they use sandbags. Some persons use blocks, whatever it is that you can use, because you're trying to minimize the damage to the infrastructure. You also want to elevate anything that you have within the housing unit. So your feeders and your waterers, you want to elevate it just in case you have some amount of flooding, that it doesn't get damaged. You also want to elevate anything that uses electricity so that that doesn't, cause any problems as the hurricane comes closer and if it is that you do have some amount of flooding. You also want to secure your supplies. So if you have your feed, you want to secure your feed so it doesn't get wet. Some persons here use some, they have these big plastic barrels. So you'll put your feed in it, you'll seal it up to make it airtight because you don't want it to get mold. You don't want water to catch it, and it will also get moldy. You also want to store water for your animals. In the same way you're storing water for yourself, store for the animals. You want to have feed and water for at least 7 to 10 days. If you can do it for a longer period, that is fine. You also want to look at covering, if you have hay, because a lot of persons will try to make their own hay or they purchase hay, you want to elevate those. You probably want to put them up on pallets and to cover them with tarpaulins. And you also want to make sure that you're securing your silage. This is another thing that we try to push in Jamaica as well, for farmers to get in the habit of making silage because it can be stored for a much longer period. It's not a difficult process. It can be stored for a much longer period and you can have it soon after a hurricane to feed your animals. You also want to, protect your equipment. So if you have machinery, you want to tie it down. You also want to make sure that you have enough fuel. Remember, we're talking about moving your animals, or even if you yourself have to move out of your situation, you want to make sure that you have enough fuel to be able to move. You also want to secure your water tanks. You want to tie them down, and water pumps that you have, milking equipment to move them as well. Small tools, you want to secure those. If you're fisher folks, you want to make sure that you bring in your boats, take up your fish pots and tie down your boats, tie the fish pots together to minimize damage as much as possible. Also, if it is that we also encourage persons to keep records of your animals, because that will help you to have documentation in terms of if after a hurricane an animal goes missing and somebody should find it, you'll be able to can clearly identify that the animal belongs to you. You can also use temporary. If it is a thing where you didn't get to permanently mark your animals, that we're talking about for cattle and small ruminants, like your sheep and your goats, you probably can use temporary markers to mark the animals so that you can find them should in case they escape during the hurricane season. If you have digital information in your animals, you're keeping records in terms of using your Excel file to document information. What you want to do is that you want to back those up, store it in the cloud. So therefore offline, so you can also have it after. If you have it printed, you can share a copy with someone else as well, so that they can have that information should in case your information get damaged somehow. Another thing that we encourage farmers to do is to make sure the drains around your farm are clean. You can also decide that you want to dig trenches to lead water away from your animal housing unit. For your broiler farmers, for your goat farmers, your pig farmers, dig trench to lead water away from the housing unit as best as possible. You also want to have a first aid kit for your animals. And this is something that we really, really push and encourage. In the same way that you're having a first aid kit for yourselves, have one for the animals as well. Because as soon as you have a hurricane and the hurricane have passed, what you want to do, you're going to have to be examining your animals to see if they have any cuts, any bruises, anything that can be treated immediately. So first aid kit is always important. Simple things like your wound powder, hydrogen peroxide to clean any wound. You have particular sprays that we can use to prevent against screwworm, whatever oils that you have, wound oil, you can also use that as well, and bandages, so that you can, like I said, treat with animals as quickly as possible. Some persons, I know some small farmers, some poultry farmers, they sometimes say, well, depending on the number of birds, because some will have as small as 25 and 50, some create a space in their house, plaster it with newspaper, and they will actually bring the animals inside. So I know on a small scale, some persons will use some tips and tricks to secure their animals even inside their home. But if it is that you cannot do that, as I indicated, just do your best to secure the animal infrastructure as best as possible. And again, just make sure you have feed and water and your first aid kit with vitamins, minerals, etc., so your animals can bounce back as quickly as possible. During the hurricane, that is something that you're going to be somewhat constrained in what you can do at that time, because you really don't want to be coming out and getting yourself into problems as well. So it's just a matter of listening to, making sure that you have your radio, your batteries, etc., to listen to all the communication that is going on, that is taking place, so that you can know how to react as well. After a hurricane, the quickest thing that you want to do is to really go and assess your animals. You want to make sure that, as I indicated, if anything had happened, if they got cuts, if they got bruises, if the poultry house was flooded out, what is the condition of the birds? If they are drowned, if there's some still alive, do that initial assessment, and then to start putting your interventions. If it is that your animals, if you had some that had drowned, you have to separate those from those that are still alive. For those that are hurt, you also want to separate those so that you can treat with each section in a targeted way. You also want to make sure that you secure the infrastructure. So if it is that you had lost roofing or anything had fallen on the house, on the unit, you want to make sure that you can remove that as quickly as possible. As I indicated before, you would have been putting up water for your animals, so you want to give the animals clean water as quickly as possible, and to start reintroducing them to feed so that they can, bounce back as quickly as possible and your livelihood can continue. It is difficult sometimes, I know, because especially when it is that you have, you know, infrastructure that is not up to a particular standard. And that is why we really encourage that you don't wait until a hurricane season. You would have been putting those infrastructure in place long before to strengthen it. So as soon as this is happening, then you are in a better position to respond. And also, just lastly, just want to say to continue to monitor your animals, because we find a lot of time when you have a hurricane, yes, you may have houses and animals that get cuts and bruises, etc. But sometimes the impact is not felt until after. We start to see the hoof rots coming in and all the other pneumonias, etc. And so that is my contribution for this part. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Maxine. Thank you very much. Our next presenter this morning is Mr. James Paul. He is the CEO of the Barbados Agriculture Society. The time is yours, Mr. James.
Thank you very much. Let me just say, first of all, uh, between 2 minutes, but I will address this now. what I think is, sorry, I'm just trying to get my camera on. Just a moment. Yes. Thank you. All right. In terms of hurricane preparedness and preparing for it, many of our farmers normally, at this as we go into the season, one of the first things that, of course, that especially depending on the category, whether or not be livestock or, for instance, crop agriculture, there are two different approaches, really. In many cases, if you listen to the previous presenter, they talk about the fact that they always need to ensure that, to the extent that it's possible, that the structures are relatively strong. As a matter of fact, a lot of the damage that happens during the hurricanes is as a result of inappropriate structures. So one of the things that we sort of try to emphasize with the farmers is to look at the structures and, to the extent that it is possible, ensure that, for instance, that they have the structures as strong as they can. One of the things too you tend to find, there are some farmers, of course, that you will have a situation in the sector where some farmers just don't want to spend any time on that. But that's just something that they have to take into consideration. The other point too I wish to make is that we have been working very closely with certain insurance providers in terms of providing insurance in some situations. And what we have been able to do in many cases is to identify those risks that are insurable and those, for instance, risks that which are not insurable. And there's some risks which are insurable because, for instance, we have been able to obtain insurance in the case of some farmers, especially in livestock, to insure some of those risks. And of course, what has happened is that there are some specifications which we have asked farmers that they have to meet. So, for instance, in terms of the construction offense, the whole question of hurricane strap is something that, for roofing, especially for in the case of poultry and pigs, and also cows, we try to do that. In some cases, so it is not possible. And the regular thing that farmers will tell you as the hurricane approaches, and they have that situation, is just let the animals go and hope for the best, because they normally will during the hurricane be able to, work up through their own survival instincts, work out what happens. The other thing that we have to recognize, I think that it was hinted by the previous speaker, is the whole question of the storage of critical inputs. For instance, you will want to make sure that during this particular stage, you have critical inputs are actually stored. From the feed, for instance, one of the things is that most of the bins, depending on the severity of the hurricanes, normally a lot of, for instance, if you're using bins for feed, they normally should last because of the fact that, for instance, once you have enough weight inside it, they will last. So that is very critical. But also not only feed, but of course, critical medicines, as was pointed out before, that is also important, that you must have those around and you store them in a safe place as is possible. And one of the things, of course, that we also advocate is watertight containers. In other words, containers that, for instance, water is not able to penetrate, and you try to store them in the most secure location that, for instance, will not be affected by wind damage or, for instance, water damage too at the same time. The other thing is too that in respect of the crops, that is a more difficult scenario in that, you operate on an open field, you're exposed to all the ravages. The best thing you can hope for in terms of crop agriculture is that the farmer can actually recover the thing as quickly as possible. And in that way, for instance, hopefully the water drains off quickly. But what is most important is to get the farmer back into production. So, for instance, the whole question of seed storage, having access to a seed bank, and even if you're going to have them, make sure that they're accessible to you. So, for instance, it makes sense during the period of the hurricane season to have seeds in store, because the other thing is that maybe because the shipment delays or damage to infrastructure, the regular seed companies will not be able to give you seeds as rapidly as they expect. So those are the other things that we also discuss with farmers. And what we can try to do is to get them to cooperate in terms of the seed banks, making sure that, for instance, that they can facilitate acting together. They can some farmers actually get together and store specific categories of seeds in order to make sure that they are able to get back up as quickly as possible, because that is one of the issues though that during the hurricane and that we have to look out for. We normally, what we don't take into consideration is the introduction of new pests, because what we have found in some cases is that when a hurricane comes, we have noticed, for instance, new pests coming in that we never saw before. And sometimes the reaction of the authorities to these new pests is something that they're not able to recognize it immediately, and therefore you're not able to do something about it quickly when the threat is low. And sometimes it might be only in a particular geographical area, so you can actually isolate it very quickly and do something about it. So one of the things that we also like to talk to our farmers is that when they do the surveys, recognize, for instance, that survey the farmers, make sure that on the events that come in, that you're not bringing new pests, and for instance, be prepared to work with our authorities to actually do something about it as quickly as they can possibly do so. The other thing, of course, too, is that in terms of the livestock themselves, what we are trying to advocate is in terms of as I said, the storage of inputs. We also, for instance, in terms of working with the vets as quickly as possible. One of the other issues too that we have when it comes to the whole question of responses after the hurricane that we're trying to work with our authorities on, the question of data, because many times the ability of, say, the government or whatever stakeholders there that say, in our case, our district emergency management organization, to respond to, say, certain needs, sometimes they do require certain data. And one of the things is that sometimes the access to the data is not what it actually should be. And one of the things we're having to try to work with our farmers is to ensure that they're preparing data on a continuum basis that meets the standards that would allow, say, our district emergency management organization to respond to them as quickly as possible. And that is an issue sometimes that you find arising, while you have sometimes slow responses on the part of authorities to, say, requests from farmers when it happens. So these are just some of the basic things. And of course, again, training, making sure that farmers themselves, we hold the courses from time to time, that they know exactly what they need to do during a hurricane, and actually work with our local authorities hand in hand in order to be able to have responses that are relevant and that the farmers can actually address. The last point I want to make, the question of, it is always here, have a pool of funds here together that we can actually, sometimes you cannot respond because insurance is there in some cases, but sometimes farmers need quick access to funds in order to get themselves back up. And one of the things that we recommended to our local governments themselves in Barbados is the fact that there need to be some pool of funds there that farmers can have ready access to. That is not something that is always readily available. And what we try to do, of course, is to work with the authorities, with the farmers, to identify those farmers who are legit and basically should be able to get access to those funds. But having a pool of funds that is there, readily accessible to the farmers, because what is happening sometimes we find is that because of the bureaucracy, and there are some cases which are actually self-evident, like a farmer's roof is blown off and he needs ready assistance, all of those things. And where, for instance, he might not have all the facilities available, we try to work very closely with the authorities to make sure that whatever funds available, that we have them there very quickly for them. So having a pool of funds, emergency funds that's readily accessible to the farmers, is very important in terms of the whole question of when the storm comes, that it is there that we can actually rely on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, James. Those are wonderful insight. Our third panelist is Dr. Shelley Bridgewater. She is the CARICOM representative from Barbados. She's a livestock scientist. She has her Master in Science in Animal Science and is a qualified veterinarian. This morning, I'd like to introduce Miss Dr. Bridgewater.
Actually. Okay.
You may proceed.
Hey, a pleasant good afternoon to everyone, and thank you, Chair, for the introduction. As my colleagues have done prior, I will be speaking on some of the disaster preparedness. My colleagues have mentioned some very important and pertinent points, and I will not repeat them, but I will just be adding to what they did not say. So one of the very important things is that having an emergency plan. And an emergency plan is actually one of the critical parts of any disaster preparedness program. And it should be subdivided into 3 stages, which is your pre-preparations, your preparation phase, followed by all the events or activities that you need to do during the time of the hurricane, and also what should be happening post-hurricane. Your preparation activities should actually begin like almost 6 to 12 months prior to the hurricane season. And one of the important things which you sometimes may forget, that even in between the hurricane season, you sometimes have some adverse weather conditions, and that may occur, and you would also need to be prepared for them as well. Some of the literature has shown that you find that farmers who have been able to put an emergency plan in place and do proper preparation have been able to rebound and recover quickly from the effects of an hurricane. So one of the first activities you need to do within the preparation process is perhaps you may have experienced hurricanes or flooding in the past, and there's need for you to do an in-house farmer's assessment. You need to put things into some introspection. What were the lessons learned prior? What happened before? Why did it happen? And how can you now prevent a reoccurrence? In order to do this, you should also do a walkthrough of your farm. And these are activities that you need to do even before the hurricane actually approaches. You need to look at what hazards are there around your housing. Is there exposed electric wires? Is there loose nails? Anything that could potentially be a form of or result in any form of injury to yourself and your animals, you need to either look at repairing those, and in some circumstances, based on the housing that you do presently have, you may need to consider rebuilding, and relocation also has to be an option as well. Once you have established what are the things that you need to do, you should create a checklist. And your checklist should actually outline exactly what are the tasks you need to do. And you need to prioritize that list. What things have to be done in terms of urgency and importance. It has to be also based on the cost. What are the most expensive things that you need to repair? And you should start preparing those as soon as possible. And you also need to consider what are the time frames required, because sometimes you may think something can be repaired very quickly, and in fact, it may take a long time. It may be taking about months to prepare, so you need to be ready for that. Sometimes we tend to forget the whole farmer's registration or getting your information lodged with the relevant agencies or authority, and that is a very critical part of your preparation activities. If you have not done your farmer's registration, you need to do so, because these are things that would help in terms of the ministry, in terms of having the correct response efforts, and even long-term agricultural resilience can be built through those efforts. What is very important as well, once the relevant authorities have your information lodged, They're able now to efficiently distribute resources. They can communicate with you more effectively and also give you the type of support that is needed for compensation. And it would also aid in future improvement and planning recovery programs from the ministry or the authorities' end. You also need to have a contact list. This is sometimes forgotten, and this contact list needs to be updated regularly. So you need to look at all the liaison persons whom you need to get in touch with. If it means from the ministry perspective, is it from the town, the parish perspective? Do you have town councils? Do you have administrators? These are the people you need to get in touch with. And we can't forget your peers as well are very important, because you can form networks where you can share information with your other peers who are livestock farmers, what is going on, so that you can get positive and correct information shared and disseminated as soon as possible. Of course, with housing facility preparations, I particularly want to zone in with the fact that some persons may actually tie their animals. And this is sometimes a common practice with us here in the Caribbean. But in cases when you do have a hurricane brewing or coming, it is best to untie that animal. You also need to avoid having your animals in very small or confined spaces. And that is simply because you want to prevent them from being trapped. Also, within your house, you need to have some sort of plan as to what kind of escape routes you can have for that animal. And I always say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. If you have repaired your structures, you want to take pictures of what your housing was, what is presently your housing is looking like even before the hurricane actually appears. And that could actually help in terms of any sort of valuation processes that is needed for you to actually access insurance if it is available. Identifying your animals. It's very important to ensure that your animals are properly identified. And you can do so either using permanent identification methods or temporary identification methods. You would find that most farmers tend to use a combination of the two. So those are things like your permanent methods is your microchipping, your air tags, your air notching, your tattoos. And then you have the temporary markers, which you can use animal markers to just put a mark on the animal, or you can use animal sprays. Now, one of the things that could be an additional support, and I'm going to say that you should not fully depend on it, is the fact that an animal's features, if your livestock have any special markings, you want to take a note of that. But you don't want to depend on that only as the only method to identify your animals. Sometimes you would hear farmers saying that they can remember all their animals. They know who they are. But you have to remember that a hurricane is a very stressful period. You're not only looking after your livestock, but you're also looking at yourself and your livelihood as well, and your family as well. So one of the things, you don't want to depend on memory, but you want to use multiple methods of identification. And again, taking a photograph of your animals before, take a front view, take a side view, so you have those things saved. So in the event they become lost or they become stolen, you have positive ways of identifying them. One of the things that you need to do is to take account of your animals, and that should be done on a regular basis. Even before the hurricane begins, you either decide that I'm going to count my animals daily or weekly. And that way, that kind of feeds into the post-hurricane assessments, because you would have had baseline information regarding the number of animals that you do have. And if you even want to get more in depth, you can actually categorize. So you can say, I have 10 breeding females. I have 40 growers. I have 5 kids. So you know specifically what are the physiological stages of these animals. And it's very important as well that you put some kind of value to the animals that you own. If you have a prize ram, you need to say this ram is about $2,000. He is going to fetch this on the market. So you need to have those things recorded. So I'm going to just skip over the activities that relates to feed and water because I think it was alluded to. But one of the things that I will mention is that during the hurricane season, you have to be very careful regarding your water sources. So one of the things is you have to make sure that even before that, whatever pipes that you have no holes or areas where contaminated water can actually enter into your pens. But when we talk about preparing that emergency kits, and I'm going straight to the veterinary supplies and medication, one of the things, if you do have animals that are already ill, in preparation for that hurricane, you need to make sure that you have their medication ready and available because you're not going to be able to go out and get that. You also need to have some of your wound cleaning supplies. So you need to have some sort of antiseptic solution. And I will say you don't want to apply the pure antiseptic solution directly to a wound. You want to have it diluted. One of the common things that you may also find during a hurricane, you may have fractures, so that you need to have some sort of support system, splints. And one of the easiest ways to make a quick splint is by cutting a PVC pipe in half. You will have to smoothen the edges, and then you would have to apply some padding. And then you would place the animal's broken limb in that area and secure it with bandage. And then at the time when you can get your veterinarian to look at it, he can do so, he or she can do so. There's also the need for some anti-diarrhea medication because sometimes animals are stressed out, they are not eating how they are accustomed. So you can anticipate some changes in their digestive system. And if it's getting to the point where it is persistent, it's not stopping, you need to have some sort of medication. And as we would normally say, when the rains come about, the biting critters come out as well because they have to feed. And sometimes what happens, they can be very irritative to your livestock. They can scratch more. They can cause bruising because they're rubbing themselves against the wall. So having some sort of insect repellent, if it be in the form of fly traps, in some cases you may have to use some insecticide spraying of the environment, and you do so exercising the necessary care. And of course, you could liaise with your vet to get some systemic medication such as ivermectin. Now, in terms of health care, your animal is going to be under some sort of stress. And the stages of your livestock that are going to be most susceptible are your old animals, your sick animals, and your young animals. So one of the things that you need to do is basically you need to have some sort of health check, a regular health check being done by your veterinarian, of course, during the course of the year. So that way you ensure that your animals remain healthy. So when these stressful periods come about, their immune system is able to withstand it much better. I can't emphasize as well, sometimes during the hurricane season, right after the hurricane season, you do have an upsurge of some of the disease-causing agents, and that's simply because the environment becomes more conducive, and sometimes you can have disease outbreaks. So that is where your health checks come into play so that you make sure that your animals are really healthy. And even after the hurricane, you want to ensure that your animals are eating the required amount, that they're drinking water. If you realize that your animals are not eating and drinking water as they should, you should separate them and you should start some sort of medical or health support to that animal. Of course, including in your routine health checks, even before the hurricane comes, should be your regular vaccines, your dewormers, whatever vitamins, whatever external parasite treatments are needed. You need to make sure that those are done. So now during the hurricane, it is important to follow the advice of your National Disaster Agency. Don't try to go outside when there's the heaviest parts of the rains coming. You need to listen. You need to be listening to your regular weather reports. And I would always say, stay calm and pray so that you can make a well-informed decision. And of course, post-hurricane, which Mrs. Brown had alluded to, you go and you do your assessments. But what is very important in that part is that you need to ensure that you participate in whatever national post-assessment activities there are. So if the relevant authorities come to you, you must be willing to share information. And of course, the hurricane season is here, so you do need to be prepared.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I will now call on Mrs. Tanya Hust. She's an experienced livestock specialist with a solid background in sustainable animal production and environmental conservation. Prior to joining FAO, she served for 8 years at the Ministry of Agriculture in Suriname, where she contributed to the National Livestock Development Initiatives. The time is now yours, Tanya.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I'm just going to share my screen. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we are. You
Yes.
could place it in a slide view and we'll see the full slide. Please?
It is not in slide view.
No, it's not. Not at this moment.
Okay, let me try again. Oh.
Okay. We'll just proceed as is.
No.
Well, we're seeing your screen though. We're seeing the actual presentation. So you may go ahead.
Yes. I'm trying to, yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. Oh, okay. Where is it? It's not here.
So in the meantime, while Tanya
Yeah, sorry about that.
I'd just like to inform that next week we continue the discussions. Next week we'll be focusing on fisheries.
Okay,
We have the
yes.
CRFM who will be among us. So those, please share the word and make sure that it's a date for next week, Friday, 12 Eastern time, to join us for that segment.
Okay.
Be assured it will be very informative, and as you have seen, we've been very practical in these presentations. So do share the information with those you know in that sector. So Tanya, you
Yeah.
ready?
Okay. Okay.
Great. I'm seeing it. Very good.
Great.
Thanks, Tanya.
All right. Thank you so much. Yes, so I will just go straight into it and try and be a bit specific. I will be trying to share some pre and post hurricane planning practical things that farmers would be able to do. So one thing when you're pre-hurricane, we start with the planning. So as the other speakers have already alluded to, you ensure that your animals are up to date with vaccinations and parasite treatments. You want to be sure that no animal is weak or looking weak and that their immune systems are not decreased for so that the animal is able to sustain itself in the period of the hurricane as well as post-hurricane. You ensure that all your animals are properly identified, as the previous speaker already alluded to. So You can use whatever method you would want, but the main thing is that your animals are registered. I think that for so what you do is for different type of animals, it can look different ways. So if you're identifying cattle, for example, you're doing it individually using tags, brands, microchips, whatever. But if it's poultry, it would look different. So, for example, with poultry beehives, you make sure that you have an inventory of your flocks and your hives. So if you have different poultry houses or an amount of poultry houses, that you count how many poultry would be in one house, and you would register or identify that one house and the poultry inside. So you would identify them as flocks. And then you would need to have them registered somewhere, of course, so that the ministry or anybody assessing post hurricane would know that these animals belong to you. So if there is nowhere to register the animals, it would be good to possibly take pictures of your animals and store those pictures either in a cloud or in a safe place. So the on the cloud would be essential. That would be the preferred method, of course, storing the pictures digitally. But if that is not possible, then storing the pictures in a safe place with your other important documents would be that would be one way to go. Um, you also make sure that you keep up-to-date records of all your livestock, all your equipment, all your feed and medications. What you can also do is look at your housing. You start looking at moving animals to more secure shelter or higher ground if they're in open fields, or if you are not able to move your animals, you can walk around your farm, reinforcing your barns, reinforcing your fences. If it is possible to put animals in closed housing, then you would want to make sure that the amount of animals put in the in closed housing is sufficient and not too many animals in one space, so that they don't injure themselves and that they have enough space to walk around. For goats, raised housing is very preferable in to make sure that they are secured from flooding or anything else that may occur during the disaster. Um, it is I think it's important, and it's something that the farmers can look at, is having a community plan. We are supposed to be where they can support each other. So if there are in the community buildings or structures where animals can be housed, then the community can support each other in with a transport plan, with transporting animals, designating sites for animals that if some farmers don't have housing, would be able to um, move their animals to other farmers, other locations or other farmers, or maybe a designated site where the animals within the community. And also a designated site for feed storage for and have that the community has a distribution plan. In this instance, if you're having a community plan, then this is where having your animals identified and registered would be very important, as after, if the animals are all together in one site in the community, it would then, after the support reintroduction and redistribution to the owners after the hurricane. So community plans are something that can be done and would help support the community and our farmers in the community. If there are associations in the community, those community plans can be led by the association or supported by the association. So as the was already said, these are some storage devices that can be used as long as they are well sealable, have a well sealable lid. If you plastic storage containers are preferable as they are waterproof um, and usually food grade. Um, Looking at your infrastructure, you can if you have backup generators, then of course you would um, test them before the hurricane. You would charge everything to generators, to flashlights and such. And if you have fuel supplies that need to be backed up, check your storage of fuel, and of course where you store them and how you store them is also important, away from the animals, so that during the hurricane the animals things don't get to and contaminated, away from feed supplies and water supplies. You would also secure your loose objects, reinforce your fencing, clean ditches, as has been said before. Um, for example, with poultry housing, you would um, secure your secure the fencing, the everything around the housing. You would take out all of the feeders and waterers. There will be, of course, there will be no eating during the hurricane. There will be stress, so you take out all of those uh, equipment. You store them in a secure place. You tie all of the you make sure all of the lamps and such are tied and not swinging around. If they're swinging lamps, that they are secured. Um, you make sure all of the drains, that there is sufficient drainage to the poultry house and so forth. And then for poultry, you can also put tarps to close off the sides of the poultry house to um, secure the poultry from wind, from rain blowing into. You can also look at the siding and windbreakers, especially for poultry. So after the hurricane now, as was said before as well, you go around and you assess. Of course, you wait until everything is safe for yourself, and then you go around assessing the physical.
Seems to be
Um,
12 to 1.
oh, someone is unmuted. Yes, you assess the physical and emotional status of all your livestock, of all your animals, and in this case, you look at physically, you look at wounds, you look at animals that are weak, appear weak, are bleeding, or and you separate those. And when you look at the emotional status of your animals, you look at signs of stress, especially um, in ruminants, for example, they can be very vocal, pacing. For poultry, they can be either huddled up or um, um, farther away from each other. They can be panting um, um, or appearing to be isolated, one appearing to be isolated from the rest, looking weak and stressed. And especially in poultry, this is something that should be very, after the hurricane, should be assessed immediately, as poultry is very prone to stress. We look also at heat stress and cold stress. So um, and then you document everything. You document injuries, you document losses, you count your animals and document losses, you document damages with photos, to the damages to your assets, damages to your buildings, damages to your animals as well. And then you isolate, as I said, you isolate animals that look stressed, that looked injured or ill. And if there are any local guidelines for safe disposal of carcasses, especially if you have dead animals, that we follow those. So in preparing, you inform yourself if there are guidelines from the ministry, and if there are not, that you, with the associations, with the community, or by yourself, you can look at what would be a safe disposal for your farm of carcasses, of waste. Where would you need to bury animals? Where would you need to store carcasses if the opportunity is not there yet, after the hurricane, to be able to bury them? This is important for the spread of diseases, to prevent spread of diseases, spread of uh, um, waste, and such. And then also you inspect your water sources before you be able, the water sources that were stored, feed sources, inspect them if to see if they are not contaminated or moldy or spoiled. For water, there are um, um, easily accessible tests, drinking water tests available. They are very cheap and easily accessible. So if you have those before the hurricane, they can be stored so that you can use these to test your water sources after post-hurricane. So these tests are, these kits are easily available on Amazon for about between 15 and 30 US dollars. You can buy a simple kit. And then you want to make sure that you clean and disinfect all the areas where your animals are, where there's waste. Clean, you start by um, um, scraping off or taking off debris, waste, and all rough waste material, and um, leaves or anything that is not conducive to the space. And then, of course, after taking off after all the dirt and everything, you want to wash down the areas and then disinfect. So wash with soap and water and then disinfect. Um, you don't have to have very expensive disinfectants. Clorox is most used and most accessible, I think. And then so you use that to disinfect where needed, to make sure that the area is clean, and then no diseases can spread after post-hurricane. And then in doing this all, you plan for a surge in insect and rodent activity, because after hurricanes, with um, flooding and those kind of things, rodents and insects will be looking for dry places and high shelters as well. So you look, and if there is a lot of waste around the area of your animals, the area of your animals is not sanitized, then you can have a surge in rodent activity and insect activity, which would lead to um, disease spread. And then you prioritize restoring your fencing and shelter, water systems, and then also you can engage with the support networks that are there, extension officers, and I think a very important aspect that needs to post-hurricane needs to be mentioned is support for mental health, especially for farmers, for farm workers. A hurricane is a very mentally taxing event, and especially if farmers have a lot of loss, a lot of destruction on their farm, this is something that they would need support for. And I think farmers should also seek out support and not be embarrassed about it, or, and I think that support should be provided as well, making sure looking after each other and making sure everybody is well after the hurricane is very important as well. You cannot take care of your animals if you are not taken care of as well. So um, those are some things that I think are very practical that farmers can use post-hurricane. So thank you.
Wow, that's a lot of very valuable information just shared. Time has passed though, so I will unfortunately not be able to take any questions from the floor, but I would like to still pose questions just for clarity and perhaps an insight. Um, we've been talking a lot about communications and how important it is in communicating. Is there any tool, any free tool that is accessible to farmers? Does anyone know? And also, along the line, how do farmers stay informed and connected with emergency services and other services they may need during a hurricane? I open the floor. I'd like to hear from James, and we can go from there. James, would you like to pitch in here?
Sorry, I'm here. Um, in terms of how farmers stay connected, usually we, it's, I mean, a lot of them have to rely on the normal communication channels. Um, Only in some cases, some farms do have like radio, their own private radio access, but really it's on the normal communication channels is how they survive. So if those go down, that will definitely be a problem. That would definitely be a problem.
So we have to always bear in mind eventuality and those such
Yes, and of course,
losses
the question
communication.
of backup power. I didn't hear a lot of the presenters talk about that, but certainly, some farms do have some backup power, and no, we do have, for instance, solar power stuff available. Again, but these have the limitations. So one of the things that we try to emphasize to farms, especially larger ones, is the use of backup generators, something that is able to provide a source of power that in the event the grid goes off, that they would still be able to at least have access to some power at the same time.
Oh, great. Maxine, would you be able to help me here? What is one way can government programs improve support before, during, after? So one way you believe that governments can provide better support, or what is the most important way you think if all else resources are limited, what one way can they really help farmers?
Okay, so there are many ways, but since you asked for one, let me see. One of the big things that they can do is to really map high-risk areas, and to because when you map the high-risk areas, then you're able to plan better. If you're going to be talking about moving resources pre-hurricane, you would know which area you'd want to move those into, so that after the hurricane, they can be easily dispersed to the persons who need it. And even though you say that resources can be low, I still would say that government needs to provide some amount of incentive or grants to farmers for them to be able to reinforce their structure. And we have been doing that in Jamaica because we know that even though the farmers would understand that there are things that they need to do, sometimes they really just don't have the resources to do everything. So yes, a farmer may say he can build a drain away from the housing unit, but he may just need some support in terms of building materials to reinforce the infrastructure. In terms of during the hurricane, it's really just about making sure that information is being circulated with national broadcast system, WhatsApp groups, that they encourage different entities to form so that farmers can link with each other and with the extension staff as well, and also to coordinate with other government agency or the disaster preparedness unit, the national security unit, because I find a lot of time that farmers sometimes are really scared to let loose their animals because they're afraid of persons stealing their animals when the animals do get out. And after, one of the things that they can do is really just to ensure that emergency supplies are provided in a timely manner. Form public-private partnerships with institutions, with commercial suppliers, because they're the ones sometimes who can be faster in terms of making things available. In Jamaica, we had, right after the hurricane, we had suppliers providing feed, replacing chickens, sorry, baby chicks, and providing building materials. So that is something that they can do. Form the public-private partnership arrangement, so that after the hurricane, the bounce back is even quicker. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So Shelley, what advice would you give? What would be three things, very briefly, three things that you would want the farmers to leave with in terms of preparing for and after a hurricane?
I think the first three most important things that they need to have in terms of preparing for a hurricane will be firstly recognizing the importance of pre-preparation. What do you need to do? And if you are unsure as to what you need to do, you can definitely reach out to your extension services, your veterinary services, your ministries, so that they can give you some guidelines. Two, you need to have your important items, your high value items well secured. You must have some sort of requisite plan. If you are unable to store it where you are located, you have to have some backup plan available in terms of how you are going to have storage of your equipment. And thirdly, you want to also have in your back of your mind that if there's a possibility that the extent of your damages are really high, you need to have some sort of evacuation plan in place, right? So you need to speak with other farmers. If it is before the hurricane, you can send your animals across another farmers' facility so that your animals can remain secure and that you can reduce any sort of losses that can happen during the hurricane season.
Thank you. Great, great. Tanya, now are there any protocols, whether it's uninformed, but that exists, that you would recommend to the livestock farmers, pre and post hurricane?
Hi. Yes, what I would recommend is to have your animals registered at the ministry. I think that is one of the most important things. Having records for yourself, but also speaking to extension officers and having some sort of record of your animals at the ministry so that after the hurricane, there's a record of which animal belongs to you. Post-hurricane, I would recommend um, having having a good immediately checking your animals and having a plan on what having your veterinarian um, s- uh, contact stored so that if there's anything that you can call, having a first aid kit for your animals so that you can um, attend to anything serious um, immediately.
Okay, great. Thank you. I note a comment here by Robert Reed. He says that the Fisheries Department in Jamaica has a VH communications stem solarized that can be extended to the wider farming community. FAO has mapped vulnerable farmers areas in Jamaica as a preparatory exercise for GCF project, ADAPT, ADAPT. And the FAO can assist with vulnerability mapping and public-private partnership for disaster prep. So that's a leave behind comment um, from Robert to us. So with that, I thank you all for joining, and I hope that this segment was very useful for you, and that you are encouraged to not wait, but take heed and try to put together a plan if you have not yet done so for your animals, and to ensure that when when we're approaching that period, so we need to be prepared. So even take away all the tips that was shared. Please stay tuned. Please share with those in the fisheries sector. Next week, we'll be focusing on fisheries. We have some great speakers coming up from the CRFM family. So please share. Please share with those in the fisheries sector. Uh, I would also like to extend special thanks to our partner agencies, SEDIMA, CAFSA, CARDI, CRFM, FAO, and AICA. You guys, for your continued collaboration and commitment to building resilience in our region. And I want to thank you, presenters. You did an awesome job. I know we're out of for time in cases, but you know what? There were very valuable information, and you can't stop that, right? So we thank you all, and thank you for those joining us. I hope to see you next week. Please bring a friend, especially those who are interested in fisheries. Please, please, please bring them along and let them know it's practical tips we're sharing. It's not theoretical. We're giving you good information that you can take and actually apply. So we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great day and a great weekend until Friday. See you.
Okay, thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.